Welcome back with a smiling face. Important note before starting, if you are a fan of audio stories, then our Patreon account is the best platform for you. Join us on Patreon for the best audiobooks ever. The Calling. Episode 3. When I came in the back door, I almost mowed down Tori. "Have fun putting out the trash?" she asked. I glanced back through the frilly curtains to see Simon near the shed. I could have said he'd been helping or, better yet, point out that Derek was there, too, if she looked closer. But I didn't much see the point. Derek blamed me for getting him into trouble. Simon blamed me for getting Derek into trouble. If Tori was going to blame me for poaching her non-boyfriend, so be it. I couldn't work up the energy to care. Ray was quiet all afternoon. Tori's comments about her parents not visiting seemed to have brought her down. At break, we got permission to go upstairs before classes and move the rest of her photos to our room. "Thanks for helping with this," she said. "I know, I don't have to clear out right now, but if I leave one of these, Tori's liable to toss it out and say she thought I didn't want it anymore." I looked at the top photo, one of a blonde girl about 3 years old and a slightly older boy, who looked Native American. Cute. "Friends? Kids you babysit?" "No, my little brother and sister." I'm sure my face turned bright red as I stammered an apology. Ray laughed. "No need to be sorry. I'm adopted. My mother was from Jamaica. Or so I'm told. She was just a kid when she had me, so she had to give me up." That, she pointed to a photo of a Caucasian couple on the beach, is my mom and dad. And that, she pointed to a Hispanic girl mugging for the camera with Donald Duck, is my sister, Jess. She's 12. That, she waved to a solemn-faced boy with red hair, is my brother, Mike. He's 8. A very multicultural family, as you can tell. 5 kids? Wow. Jess and I were adopted. The others are fosters. Mom likes kids." She paused. "Well, in theory anyway." We walked to my room. She took the stack of photos from me and put them on her new dresser. As she moved her Nintendo DS aside, her fingers tapped the scratched plastic. "You know how some kids are when they get a new gizmo? For weeks or even months, it's the coolest, best, most interesting what's it they've ever owned, and they can't stop talking about it. They carry it everywhere. Then, one day, they're all hyped up over some new gadget. There's nothing wrong with the old one. It just isn't cool and new anymore. Well, that's how my mom is." She turned and walked to the bed. "Only with her, it isn't gadgets. It's kids. Oh. When they're little, they're great. When they get older, not so much." Ray sat on the bed and shook her head. "Yeah, I'm probably being too hard on her. You know how it is. When you're little, your mom is so cool and she can't do anything wrong, and then you get older." She stopped and blushed. "No, I guess you wouldn't know what that's like, would you?" "Sorry." "It's okay." I sat on my bed. "Your dad never got married again?" I shook my head. "So who looks after you?" As we headed down to class, I told her about Aunt Lauren, and the endless succession of housekeepers, making her laugh with my impressions, and forgot everything else, at least for a little while. That afternoon, during my session with Dr. Gill, I put on an Oscar-worthy performance. I admitted that, as she'd suspected, I had thought I might be seeing ghosts. Now, after hearing her diagnosis and letting my medication take effect, I understood that I'd been hallucinating. I was a schizophrenic. I needed help. She totally bought it. All I had to do now was keep up the act for a week or so, and I'd be free. When classes ended, Ray and I did our homework together in the media room. Simon passed the door a couple of times and I thought maybe he wanted to talk to me, but when I stuck my head out the door, he'd disappeared upstairs. As I worked, I thought about that patch of fog in the yard. If Derek hadn't seen it, too, I might have mistaken it for a ghost. Why had he shushed Simon? Was Simon somehow causing my hallucinations? Some kind of special effects? Sure, that would explain the ghosts I'd seen at school, holographic projections created by a guy I'd never met. Right. But something was going on. Or, at least, that's what Derek wanted me to believe. By refusing to explain and making a big deal of refusing, Derek wanted me to do exactly what I was doing right now, driving myself nuts wondering what he wasn't telling me. He wanted me to go to him, begging for answers, so he could taunt and torment me some more. There was no way Simon or Derek could have created the ghosts at school, but that fog would be a simple effect to pull off. Maybe Derek had done it. That's why Simon had protested, and Derek had shut him up. Was Simon afraid of his brother? He pretended to defend him and act like best buds, but what choice did he have? He was stuck with Derek until his father returned. Where was his father? Why had he enrolled Simon and Derek in school under false names? Why was Simon even here, if he didn't have a file? Too many questions. I needed to start finding answers. We were clearing the table after dinner when Mrs. Talbot came into the dining room with a man she introduced as Dr. Davidoff, the head of the board that ran Lyle House. With only a thin circle of hair and a huge, sharp nose, he was so tall that he seemed to be permanently leaning down to hear better. With the hair and the nose, he bore an unfortunate resemblance to a vulture, head tucked down, eyes beady behind his glasses. This must be little Chloe Saunders. He beamed with the false heartiness of a middle-aged guy who doesn't have kids and never stops to think that a 15-year-old girl might not like being called little Chloe Saunders. He awkwardly clapped me on the back. "I like your hair, Chloe. Red stripes. Very cool." He said cool like I say a Spanish word when I'm not sure of the pronunciation. Ray rolled her eyes behind his back, then came around front. "Hey, Dr. D. Rachel." "Oh, sorry, Ray, right? Are you keeping out of trouble?" Ray flashed a perky smile, one custom-made for adults she had to suck up to. "Always, Dr. D. That's my girl. Now, Chloe, Dr. Gill tells me you had quite a breakthrough today. She's very pleased with your progress and how quickly you've fit into the therapeutic routine and accepted your diagnosis." I tried not to squirm. He meant well, but being a good patient wasn't something I wanted to be publicly congratulated on. Especially when Derek had stopped eating to watch. "Now run along, take your meds and be a good girl," Dr. Davidoff continued. "Normally, I don't meet with our young people until they've been here at least a week, but since you're speeding right along, Chloe, I don't want to hold you back. I'm sure you're eager to get back to your friends and school as soon as possible. Yes, sir. I copied Ray's perky smile, ignoring Derek's heavy gaze. Come along then and we'll chat in Dr. Gill's office. He put his hand on one shoulder to propel me out. Tori stepped in front of us. Hello, Dr. Davidoff. That new medicine you have me on is working great. I'm really doing well. That's good, Victoria. He absently patted her arm, then led me out. The session was similar to the first one I'd had with Dr. Gill, filling in background. Who was Chloe Saunders? What had happened to her? How did she feel about it? I'm sure he could get all this from Dr. Gill's notes, and she'd stayed late today to sit in, but it was like in a cop movie, where the detective interviews the suspect, asking all the same questions as the last guy. It's not the information that's important, but how I tell it. What's my emotional reaction? What extra details did I add this time? What did I leave out? For all his false hardiness, Dr. Davidoff was Dr. Gill's supervisor, meaning he was here to check her work. Dr. Gill had sat stiff and tense, leaning forward, squinting at me as she raced to capture every word, every gesture, like a student afraid to miss a key point for the exam. Dr. Davidoff took his time, getting a coffee for himself and a juice box for me, relaxing in Dr. Gill's chair, chatting me up before we started. When he asked whether I'd had any hallucinations since I'd been here, I said yes. I'd seen a disembodied hand the second morning and heard a voice later that day. I didn't mention yesterday but said honestly that all had been fine today. I sailed through the session without a hitch. At the end, he told me I was doing fine, just fine, patted me on the back, and led me from the office. As I passed the open media room door, I glanced inside. Derek was at the computer, his back to me as he played what looked like a war strategy game. Simon was also playing a game, on his Nintendo DS, as he sprawled sideways in the recliner, legs draped over the arm. He noticed me and straightened, lips parting as if ready to call after me. If you're going for a snack, grab me a Coke, Derek said, attention fixed on the screen. You know where they're hidden. Simon paused, gaze shunting between us. His brother was giving him the perfect excuse to sneak out and talk to me, but he still hesitated, as if sensing a setup or a test. There was no way Derek knew I was here, behind his back. Yet Simon slouched in his chair. You want a Coke? Get it yourself. I didn't ask you to get me one. I said if you were going. I'm not. Then say so already. What's with you tonight? I continued down the hall. I found Ray in the dining room, homework spread across the table. You've got a DS, don't you? I asked. Yep. Only Mario Kart's on it, though. You want to borrow it? Please. It's on my dresser. I walked past the media room doorway again. The guys were still there, looking like they hadn't budged since I last passed. Again Simon glanced up. I waved Ray's DS and gestured. He grinned and shot me a discreet thumbs up. Now to find a place within range. I had a DS at home and knew I should be able to connect with another one within 50 feet. The media room was sandwiched between the front hall and the classroom, both off limits for hanging out. but it was also right under the bathroom. So I went up, started PictoChat and prayed I could connect to Simon. I could. I used the stylus to write my message, "You want to talk?" He drew a check mark, then wrote D followed by a picture that, after a moment I realized was an I. Yes, he wanted to talk, but Derek was keeping an eye on him. Before I could reply, he sent another. D8. A box with soap drawn in it, surrounded by bubbles. It took a moment, but I finally interpreted that as Derek has a shower around 8. He erased it and drew an 8 followed by yard. Meet him outside at 8. I sent back a check mark. 19. At 7:50, I was helping Ray empty the dishwasher. From the hall, I heard Simon ask if he could go out back and shoot hoops while Derek showered. Mrs. Talbot warned that it was getting dark, and he couldn't stay out for long, but she turned off the alarm and let him go. Once the dishwasher was empty, I told Ray I'd catch up with her later, then slipped out after him. As Mrs. Talbot warned, dusk was already falling. Huge shade trees bordered the deep yard, casting even more shadow. The basketball net was on a patch of concrete beyond the reach of the porch light, and I could see only the white flash of Simon's shirt and hear the thump 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 of the dribbled ball. I circled the perimeter. He didn't see me, just kept dribbling, gaze fixed on the ball, face solemn. Keeping to the shadows, I moved closer and waited for him to see me. When he did, he jumped, as if startled, then waved me to an even darker spot on the other side of the net. "Everything okay?" I asked. "You looked busy." "Just thinking." His gaze swept the fence line. "Can't wait to get out of here." "Just like everyone else I guess, but..." "Ray said you've been here a while." "You could say that." A shadow passed behind his eyes, like he was scanning his future, seeing no sign of release. At least I had some place to go. They'd been in child services. Where would they go from here? He bounced the ball hard and managed a smile. "Wasting our time, aren't I? I've got about 10 minutes before Derek tracks me down. First off, I wanted to say I'm sorry." "Why?" "You didn't do anything." "For Derek. He's your brother, not your responsibility. You can't help what he does." I nodded toward the house. "Why didn't you want him seeing us talking?" "Will he get mad?" "He won't be happy," but he caught my expression and let out a sharp laugh. "You mean, am I afraid he'll beat the crap out of me?" "No way. Derek isn't like that at all. If he gets mad, he just treats me the same way he treats everyone else, ignores me. Hardly fatal, but, no, I can help it. It's just..." He bounced the ball, gaze fixed on it. After a moment, he stopped and flipped it into his hands. "He's already mad that I defended him. He hates that, and now if I'm talking to you, trying to explain things, when he doesn't want them explained." He twirled the ball on his fingertip. "See, Derek's not really a people person." I tried not to look shocked. "When he decided you might really be seeing ghosts, I should have said, 'Sure, bro, let me talk to her.' I'd have handled it, well, different. Derek doesn't know when to back off. To him, it's as simple as adding 2 plus 2. If you can't figure it out yourself and you don't listen when he tells you the answer, he'll keep slamming you until you wake up. Running away screaming doesn't help. He laughed. Hey, if Derek kept coming at me, I'd be screaming, too. And you didn't run anywhere today. You stood up to him, which, believe me, he's not used to. A grin. Good on ya. That's all you have to do. Don't take his crap. He took another shot. This one dropped gracefully through the hoop. So Derek thinks I'm a necromancer. You're seeing ghosts, right? A dead guy who talked to you, chased you, asked for your help. How did you? I stopped myself. My heart thumped, breath coming hard and fast. I'd just convinced Dr. Gill that I'd accepted my diagnosis. As much as I longed to trust Simon, I didn't dare. How did I know? Because that's what ghosts do to necromancers. You're the only person who can hear them, and they all have something to say. That's why they're hanging out here, in limbo or whatever. He shrugged as he tossed the ball. I'm not real clear on the specifics. Never actually met a necromancer. I just know what I've been told. I inhaled and exhaled before saying, as casually as I could, I guess that makes sense. That's what you'd expect ghosts would do to people who think they can talk to the dead. Mediums, spiritualists, psychics, whatever. He shook his head. Yes, mediums, spiritualists, and psychics are people who think they can talk to the dead. But necromancers can. It's hereditary. He smiled. Like blonde hair. You can cover it up with red streaks, but underneath, it's still blonde. And you can ignore the ghosts, but they'll still come. They know you can see them. I don't understand. He flipped the ball and caught it on his open palm. Then he murmured something. I was about to say I couldn't hear him when the ball rose. Levitating. I stared. Yeah, I know, it's about as useless as that patch of fog, he said, gaze fixed on the levitating ball, as if concentrating. Now, if I could lift it more than a couple of inches, maybe to the top of that hoop, and slam dunk it every time, that'd be a trick. But I'm not Harry Potter and real magic doesn't work that way. That's magic, I said. The ball dropped into his hand. You don't believe me, do you? No, He cut me off with a laugh. You think it's some kind of trick or a special effect? Well, movie girl, get your butt over here and test me. Get over here. He pointed at the spot beside him. See if you can find the strings. I slid closer. He said some words, louder now, so I could hear them. It wasn't English. When the ball didn't move, he cursed. Did I mention I'm not Harry Potter? Let's try that again. He repeated the words, slower, his gaze glued to the ball. It rose 2 inches. Now check for strings or wires or whatever you think is holding it up. I hesitated, but he prodded and teased me until I moved closer and poked a finger between the ball and his hand. When I didn't hit anything, I slid all my fingers through, then waggled them. Simon's fist closed, grabbing my hand, and I yelped as the ball bounced off across the concrete pad. Sorry, he said, grinning, his fingers still holding mine. I couldn't resist. Yes, I'm skittish, as your brother has probably pointed out. So how did you? I looked at the ball, coming to rest on the grass. Wow! His grin grew. You believe me now? As I stared at the ball, I struggled for other explanations. None came. Can you teach me how to do that? I said finally. Nah. No more than you can teach me how to see ghosts. Either you have it or you. Playing basketball in the dark, Simon, asked a voice across the yard. You should have called me. You know I'm always up for a little. Tori stopped short, seeing me now. Her gaze moved to my hand, still in his. One-on-one, she finished. I yanked my fingers away. She kept staring. Hey, Tori, Simon said as he retrieved the ball. What's up? I saw you playing and thought maybe you could use a partner. Her gaze swung my way, expression unreadable. I guess not. I should get inside, I said. Thanks for the pointers, Simon. No, hold up. He took a step after me, then glanced at Tori. Right. You're welcome. And it is getting dark, isn't it? It must be snack time by now. He hurried into the house. I lay in bed, unable to sleep again. This time, though, it wasn't bad dreams that kept me awake but thoughts pinging through my head, so shrill and insistent that by midnight, I was seriously considering a real kitchen raid to grab the travel tube of Tylenol I'd seen there. I was a necromancer. Having a label should have come as a relief, but I wasn't sure this one was any better than schizophrenic. At least schizophrenia was a known and accepted condition. I could talk to people about it, get help coping with it, take my meds, and make the symptoms go away. Those same meds might cover the symptoms of necromancy, but as Simon said, it would be like coloring my hair. I'd still be the same underneath, my true nature waiting to pop up as soon as the medication wore off. Necromancy. Where had it come from? My mother? If so, why didn't Aunt Lauren know about it? From my father? Maybe he hadn't worked up the nerve to warn me and that's why he'd seemed so guilty in the hospital, so eager to make me happy and comfortable. Or maybe neither of my parents or my aunt knew anything about it. It could be a recessive gene, one that skipped generations. Simon was lucky. His dad must have told him about the magic, showed him how to use it. My envy evaporated. Lucky? He was stuck in a group home. His magic didn't seem to be doing him any good here. Magic. The word came so casually, as if I'd already accepted it. Had I? Should I? I'd spent days denying that I saw ghosts, and now, suddenly, I had no problem believing in magic. I should be demanding more strations. Coming up with alternate explanations. But I'd done that with myself, and now, having realized that I really did see the dead, there was almost a comfort in accepting that I wasn't the only one out there with weird powers. And what about Derek? Simon said Derek was unnaturally strong. Was that magical? I'd felt that strength. I'd read his file, and I knew even the authorities had been stumped for a cause. As bizarre as it sounded, the explanation that made the most sense was the most far-fetched one. There were people out there with powers found only in legends and movies. And we were part of that. I almost laughed. It was like something out of a comic book. Kids with supernatural powers, like superheroes. Superheroes? Right. Somehow, I didn't think seeing ghosts and levitating basketballs was going to help us save the world from evil anytime soon. If both Derek and Simon had powers, is that how they'd ended up together, as foster brothers? What had their dad told them? Did his disappearance have something to do with being magical? Was that why the guys had enrolled in school under fake names and kept moving around? Is that what our kind had to do? Hide? The questions crowded my brain, none of them willing to leave without answers, answers I couldn't get at 2 in the morning. They bounced around like Simon's basketball. After a while, I swore I could see them orange balls bouncing through my head, back and forth, until I fell asleep. A voice sliced through the heavy blanket of sleep, and I bolted up, fighting my way to consciousness. I gulped air as I surveyed the room, ears and eyes straining. All was still and silent. I glanced over at Ray. She was sound asleep. A dream. I started lying back down. Wake up! The whisper floated through the half-open door. I lay down, resisting the urge to pull the covers higher. I thought you weren't going to cower anymore? That's the plan, right? Not to ignore the voices but get answers, take control. A deep breath. Then I slipped out of bed and walked to the door. The hall was empty. I could hear only the tick-tick-tick of the grandfather clock downstairs. As I turned, a pale shape flickered near a closed door down the hall. A closet, I'd presumed earlier. What was it with ghosts and closets in this house? I crept down the hall and eased the door open. Dark stairs led up. The attic. This was as bad as a basement, maybe even worse. I wasn't following some ghost up there. Good excuse. It's not an. You don't want to talk to them. Not really. You don't want to know the truth. Great. Not only did I have to deal with Derek's taunts and jibes, but now even my inner voice was starting to sound like him. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. 20. I slid my hand along the wall, searching for a light switch, then stopped. Was that a good idea? With my luck, Tori would head to the bathroom, see the attic light on, and investigate, only to find me up there talking to myself. I left the light off. One hand on the railing, the other gliding along the opposite wall, I climbed the stairs, ascending into blackness. My hand slipped off the end of the railing, and I pitched forward. I'd reached the top. A trickle of moonlight came from the tiny attic window, but even after I paused to let my eyes adjust, I could only make out vague shapes. I walked with my hands out, feeling my way. I smacked into something, and it sent up a cloud of dust. My hands flew over my nose to stifle a sneeze. Girl! I stiffened. It was the ghost from the basement, the one who kept insisting I open the locked door. I took a deep breath. Whoever he was, he couldn't hurt me. Even that janitor, as hard as he tried, couldn't do anything more than scare me. I had the power here. I was the necromancer. Who are you? I asked. Contact, get through. I can't understand you. Blocked. Something was blocking him from making contact? Leftover meds in my system? Basement, try, Try that door again? Forget it. No more basements. No more attics. If you want to talk to me, do it on the main level. Got it? Can't block. Yes, you're blocked. I think it's something I was taking, but it should be better tomorrow. Talk to me in my room. When I'm alone. Okay. Silence. I repeated it, but he didn't answer. I stood there, shivering, for at least 5 minutes before trying one last time. When he didn't respond, I turned toward the stairs. Chloe. I wheeled so fast I knocked into something at knee level, my bare legs scraping against wood, hands hitting the top with a thud, enveloping me in a cloud of dust. I sneezed. Bless you. A giggle. Do you know why we say that? Blood pounded in my ears as I recognized the voice. I could make out Liz, a few feet away, dressed in her Minnie Mouse nightshirt. It's because when we sneeze, our soul flies out our nose, and if no one says bless you, the devil can snatch it. Another giggle. Or so my Nana always said. Funny, hey. I opened my mouth but couldn't force words out. She looked around, nose wrinkling. Is this the attic? What are we doing up here? I. Take a deep breath. That always helps my brother. Another look around. How did we get up here? Oh, right. The séance. We were going to do a séance. Séance. I hesitated. Don't you remember? Remember what? She frowned. Are you okay, Chloe? No, I was pretty sure I wasn't. You? Never mind. I was just talking to a man. Can you see him? Is he here? No. It's just us. Her eyes went round. Are you seeing ghosts? Ghosts. Chloe. This voice was sharp and I spun to see Mrs. Talbot feeling her way over to me. I turned back to Liz. No one was there. Chloe, what are you doing up here? I thought I heard a mouse. Or a rat. Something was moving around up here. And you were talking to it. Tori stepped through the attic doorway. And no, Oh, I'm pretty sure I heard you say ghost. And you were definitely talking to someone. It seems you aren't quite as cured as you said you were. Mrs. Talbot brought me a sleeping pill and waited while I took it. The whole time, she didn't say a word to me, but as I heard her feet tapping double time down the stairs, I knew there would be a lot of words for Dr. Gill and Dr. Davidoff. I'd blown it. Tears burned my eyes. I swiped them back. You really can see ghosts, can't you? Ray whispered. I said nothing. I heard what happened. You aren't even going to admit it to me now, are you? I want to get out of here. News flash. We all do. An edge crept into her voice. It's fine to lie to them. But I thought you were seeing ghosts even before you did. Who gave you the idea of looking up that guy you saw at your school? You looked him up, didn't you? You just didn't bother to tell me. That's not. She rolled over, her back to me. I knew I should say something, but I wasn't sure what. When I closed my eyes, I saw Liz again and my stomach clenched. Had I really seen her? Talked to her? I struggled for some other explanation. She couldn't be a ghost because I'd seen and heard her clearly, not like the ghost who'd called me up there. And she couldn't be dead. The nurses had promised we could talk to her. When could we talk to her? I struggled to get up, suddenly needing to know now. But I was so tired that I couldn't think straight and hovered there, propped up on my elbows, as the sleeping pill kicked in. Something about Liz. I wanted to check. My head fell back to the pillow. 21. The next morning when I was called into a meeting with the doctors, I did my best damage control. I claimed I really had gotten past the I see dead people stage and accepted my condition, but had woken up hearing a voice in the night, calling me to the attic. I'd been confused, sleep drunk, dreaming of seeing ghosts, not really seeing them. Dr. Gill and Dr. Davidoff didn't fully appreciate the distinction. Then Aunt Lauren arrived. It was like when I'd been 11, caught peeking at test scores, egged on by the new classmates I'd been eager to impress. Being hauled to the principal's office had been bad enough. But the disappointment on Aunt Lauren's face had hurt worse than any punishment. That day, I saw the same disappointment, and it didn't hurt any less. In the end, I managed to persuade them all that I'd had a minor setback, but it was like the little boy crying wolf. The next time I said I was improving, they'd be a lot slower to believe me. No quick track to release now. We're going to need you to provide urine samples for the next week, Dr. Gill said. Oh, that's ridiculous, Aunt Lauren said. How do we know she wasn't sleepwalking and dreaming? She can't control her dreams. Dreams are the windows to the soul, Dr. Gill said. That's the eyes, my aunt snapped. Anyone versed in psychiatry will tell you it's the same for dreams. Dr. Gill's voice was level, but her look said she was sick of parents and guardians questioning her diagnoses and defending their children. Even if Chloe is only dreaming she sees ghosts, it suggests that, subconsciously, she hasn't accepted her condition. We need to monitor her with urine tests. I don't understand, I said. Why do I need urine tests? To ensure you are receiving the proper dosage for your size, activity level, food intake, and other factors. It's a delicate balance. You don't believe, Aunt Lauren began. Dr. Davidoff cleared his throat. Aunt Lauren pressed her lips into a thin line and started picking lint from her wool skirt. She rarely backed down from an argument, but these doctors held the key to my future. I already knew what she'd been going to say. The urine tests weren't to check my dosage. They were to make sure I was taking my pills. Since I'd missed morning classes, I was assigned lunch duty. I was setting the table, lost in my thoughts, when a voice said, "I'm behind you." I spun to see Derek. "I can't win," he said. "You're as skittish as a kitten. So if you sneak up and announce yourself, that's going to startle me less than if you tap me on the shoulder." I didn't sneak. He shook his head, grabbed 2 rolls from the bread basket, then rearranged the others to hide the theft. "I just wanted to say that if you and Simon want to talk, you don't need to do it behind my back. Unless you want to. We were just. I know what you were doing. Simon already told me. You want answers. I've been trying to give them to you all along. You just have to ask. But you said. Tonight. 8. Our room. Tell Mrs. Talbot you'll be with me for math tutoring. Your side is off limits. Is she going to let me go up there, alone, with a boy? Just tell her it's for math. She won't question it. Because he had problems with math, I supposed. Will that be okay? You and I aren't supposed to. Tell her Simon will be there. And talk to Talbot, not Van Dop. 22. Ray and I didn't speak much all day. She wasn't nasty, Ray wasn't like that. She sat beside me in class and asked questions, but there was no chatter, no giggling, or goofing off. Today we were classmates, not friends. Before dinner, when we'd normally hang out or do homework together, she took her books, retreated to the dining room, and closed the door. After dinner, I followed her into the kitchen with my dirty plates. It's my turn to do laundry, I said. Would you have a minute to show me how to use the machine? I lowered my voice. And I'd like to talk to you. She shrugged. Sure. I'm sorry I didn't tell you, I said as she straightened the dials on the washer. I'm having a hard time with it. Why? You can talk to the dead. How cool is that? It wasn't cool at all, it was terrifying. But I didn't want to sound like I was whining. Or maybe I just didn't want to sound like a wimp. I dumped in the first load and added soap. Whoa, whoa. You'll give this place a bubble carpet. She took the soap box from me and scooped some of the detergent back out of the machine. If you can prove you're seeing ghosts, why not just tell them? A perfectly logical question, but at the thought, some deep-rooted instinct screamed, don't tell. Never tell. I don't want to tell anyone the truth. Not yet. Not here. She nodded and set the box aside. Gil is a pencil pusher with all the imagination of a thumbtack. She'd keep you locked up in here until you stopped this ghost nonsense. Better to save the spooky stuff for when you get out. We sorted a basket of laundry in silence, then I said, the reason I asked to talk to you down here is, well, there's a ghost. She took a slow look around, wrapping a t-shirt around her hand like a boxer taping up for a fight. Not right now. I mean, there was a ghost in here. The same one I heard upstairs last night. Before Liz showed up. All day I'd been struggling not to think of Liz. If I was seeing her, didn't that mean? Why hadn't I asked Mrs. Talbot when I could talk to Liz? Was I afraid of the answer? He say. I shook it off and turned to Ray. What did the ghost say? It's hard to tell. He keeps cutting out. I think it's the meds. But he said he wanted me to open that door. I pointed. Her head whipped around so fast she winced and rubbed her neck. That door. Her eyes glittered. The locked basement door. Yes, cliché, I know. Hoo-hoo, don't go into the locked room, little girl. Ray was already striding to the door. I said, I thought maybe we could, you know, check it out. Like open it. Of course. I'd have done that days ago. She jiggled the handle. How can you live with the suspense? For starters, I'm pretty sure there's nothing in there. Then why is it locked? Because it's for storing stuff they don't want us messing with. lawn furniture, winter bedding, Christmas decorations. The bodies of Lyle House kids who never went home. She grinned, but I froze, thinking of Liz. Geez, I'm kidding. You are such a girl. No, I've just seen too many movies. That, too. She walked back to the laundry shelves and rooted through a box. Another crappy lock, so easy a 6-year-old with a credit card can pick it. Not many 6-year-olds have credit cards. I bet Tori did. That's who this house is made for. She lifted a sponge, shook her head, and dropped it back into the box. Rich kids whose only use for a credit card is buying a new pair of Timbs. They stick cheap locks on the doors, knowing you guys will turn the handle and say "Hey," locked and walk away. That's... She stopped me with a look. Unfair? That's exactly what you did, girl. She brandished a stiff piece of cardboard, a tag ripped off a new shirt. It's not perfect, she murmured as she slid it between the door and the frame. But she jiggled the cardboard and swore. Or maybe she swiped it down sharply, a ripping sound as it tore in half. Won't. More curses, some of them quite creative. There's a piece caught. Here, let me. I grabbed the edge between my fingernails, which would have been much easier if I had any. When I'd woken in the hospital, my nails had been filed to the pink, like they'd been worried I'd commit suicide by scratching. I managed to get hold of the cardboard, pulled, and ripped out another chunk, leaving the rest wedged in where no nails, however long, could reach it. Get the feeling someone doesn't want us going in there, Ray said. I tried to laugh, but ever since she'd mentioned bodies, there'd been a sour taste in my mouth. We're going to need the key, she pronounced, straightening. It might be on the ring with the one for the shed in the kitchen. I'll get it. When I slipped into the kitchen, Derek was pawing through the fruit basket. The door hadn't made any noise opening and he had his back to me. The perfect chance for payback. I took 3 slow, silent steps toward him, barely daring to breathe. The key you want isn't on that ring, he said, not looking my way. I froze. He dug out an apple, took a bite, then walked to the fridge, reached behind it, and pulled off a magnetized set of keys. Try these. He dropped them in my hand and walked past me to the kitchen door. I have no idea what you guys are doing down there, but next time you want to secretly open a locked door, don't wail on it hard enough to bring down the house. When I brought the keys downstairs, I didn't tell Ray that Derek knew what we were up to. She might have decided to abort the plan. Anyway, tattling wasn't Derek's style. Or so I hoped. As Ray tried the keys, I rubbed the back of my neck, grimacing against the dull throb of a threatening headache. Was I really that anxious about what lay behind the door? I rolled my shoulders, trying to shake it off. Found it, she whispered. She swung open the door to reveal an empty closet. Ray stepped inside. I followed. We were in a space so small we could both barely fit. Okay, Ray said. This is weird. Who builds a closet, doesn't put anything in it, then locks it? There's gotta be a catch. She rapped on the wall. Yo! It's concrete. Painted concrete. Scraped my knuckles good. She touched the adjoining walls. I don't get it. Where's the rest of the basement? I rubbed my temple, now throbbing. It's a half-basement. My aunt lived in an old Victorian place before she got sick of the renovations and moved into a condo. She said when her house was built, it didn't have a basement at all, just a crawl space under the house. Then someone dug out a room for the laundry. She used to have real bad problems with flooding and stuff. Maybe that's why this is empty and locked. So no one uses it. Okay, so what does your spook want you to see? Overlooked storage space. I told you it was probably nothing. The words came out more sharply than I intended. I rolled my shoulders and rubbed my neck again. What's wrong? Ray laid her hand on my arm. God, girl, you're covered in goosebumps. Just a chill. Maybe it's a cold spot. I nodded, but I didn't feel cold. Just anxious. Like a cat sensing a threat, its fur rising. There's a ghost here, isn't there? She said, looking around. Try contacting it. How? She shot me a look. Start with hello. I did. More, Ray said. Keep talking. Hello? Is anyone there? She rolled her eyes. I ignored her. I felt foolish enough without having my dialogue critiqued. If someone's here, I'd like to talk to you. Close your eyes, Ray said. Focus. Something told me it had to be a lot more complicated than close your eyes, focus, and talk to them. But I didn't have a better idea. So I gave it a shot. Nothing, I said after a moment. When I opened my eyes, a figure flashed past so fast it was only a blur. I wheeled, trying to follow, but it was gone. What? Ray said. What did you see? I closed my eyes and struggled to pull a replay tape from memory. After a moment, it came. I saw a man dressed in a gray suit, clean-shaven, wearing a fedora and horn-rimmed glasses, like someone out of the 50s. I told her what I'd seen. But it was just a flash. It's the meds. I had to take them today and they seem to block transmission. I only get flashes. I turned slowly, eyes narrowing as I concentrated as hard as I could, looking for even the faintest shimmer. As I circled, my elbow hit the door, knocking it against the wall with an oddly metallic clank. Motioning Ray aside, I pulled the door forward to peek behind it. She squeezed in to take a look. Seems we missed something, hey, she said, grinning. The closet was so small that when the door opened, it had blocked the left wall. Now, looking behind it, I saw there was a metal ladder fastened to that wall. It led up a few steps to a small wooden door halfway up the wall, the gray paint blending with the concrete. I stepped onto the ladder. The door was secured only with a latch. One hard push and it swung open into darkness. A musty stink billowed out. The smell of the moldering dead. Right. Like I knew what the dead smelled like. The only body I'd ever seen had been my mother's. She hadn't smelled dead. She'd smelled like Mom. I shook the memory off. I think it's a crawl space, I said. Like at my aunt's old place. Let me take a look. Hey. She plucked at the back of my shirt. Not so fast, it looks awfully dark in there, too dark for someone who sleeps with the blinds open. I ran my hand over the floor. Damp, packed dirt. I fell along the wall. A dirt crawl space, I said. With no light switch, we're going to need a flashlight. I saw one. I know. My turn to get it. 23. When Ray got back, she spread her empty hands wide and said, "Okay, guess where I hid it." She even turned around for me, but I could see no bulge big enough to hide a flashlight. With a grin, she reached down the front of her shirt into the middle of her bra, and pulled out a flashlight with flourish. I laughed. "Cleavage is great," she said. "Like an extra pocket." She smacked the flashlight into my hand. I shone it into the crawl space. The dirt floor extended through the darkness as far as the beam pierced. I waved the flashlight. The beam bounced off something to my left. A metal box. "There's a box," I said. "But I can't reach it from here." I climbed the remaining 2 steps and crawled in. The space stunk of dirt and stale air, as if no one had been there in years. The ceiling was really low, so I had to waddle hunched over. I maneuvered to the box. It was dull gray metal with the kind of lid that lifted off, like a gift box. "Is it locked?" Ray whispered. She had climbed the ladder and was peering in. I passed the light around the perimeter of the lid. No sign of a lock. "Well, open it," she said. Kneeling, I gripped the flashlight between my knees. My fingertips slid under the lid's rim. Come on," Ray said. I ignored her. This room was what the ghost had wanted me to see. I was sure of it. And this box was the only thing I could see in this barren, dark space. I'd seen boxes like this in movies, and what lay inside was never good. Body parts were usually involved. But I had to know. The lid started coming off, then stopped. I jiggled it. One side came up, but the other caught. I slid my fingertips around the edge, trying to find what it was catching on. It was a piece of paper. I tugged, and the paper ripped, leaving me with a corner. There was handwriting on it, but only fragments of words. I found the part of the paper still stuck in the box and pulled, prying the lid with my other hand. One sharp tug, and the paper came free, and so did the lid, flying off and landing in my lap. Before I could think about whether I wanted to look, I was looking, staring straight down into the box. "Papers," Ray said. "It looks like files." I reached into a folder marked 2002 and pulled out a sheaf of papers. I read the first. Property taxes. I flipped through the other pages. It's just records of stuff they needed to keep. They put them into a fireproof box and stored it here. The door's probably only locked so we don't snoop. Or this isn't what the ghost was telling you about. That means there must be something else down here. We spent 10 minutes crawling around, and finding nothing more than a dead mole that stunk so bad I nearly puked. "Let's go," I said, crouched on my heels with my arms crossed. "There's nothing here, and it's freezing." Ray shone the flashlight in my face. I swatted it out of the way. "No need to get snippy," Ray said. "I was just going to say it's not cold." I took her hand and wrapped it around my arm. I'm cold. Those are goosebumps, all right? Feel them. I didn't say you weren't. I'm going. Stay if you want. I started crawling away. When Ray grabbed my foot, I yanked hard, almost toppling her over. What's with you? She said. I rubbed my arms. Tension strummed my nerves. My jaw ached, and I realized I was clenching my teeth. I was okay before, but now I just want to get out. Ray crawled up beside me. You're sweating, too. Sweat and goosebumps. And your eyes are all glittery, like you have a fever. Maybe I do. Can we just? There's something here, isn't there? No, I stopped and looked around. Maybe. I don't know. It's just I need to go. Okay. She handed me the flashlight. Lead the way. The moment my fingers closed around the flashlight, the light started to dim. Within seconds, it was giving off only a faint yellowish glow. Tell me that's the batteries going, Ray whispered. I quickly handed it back to her. The light surged, but only for a second. Then it went out, plunging us into darkness. Ray let out an oath. A swish. Light flared. Ray's face glowed behind the match flame. Knew these things would come in handy someday, she said. Now. She stopped, her gaze going to the flame. She stared at it like a child mesmerized by a campfire. Ray. I said. Oh, sorry. A sharp shake of her head. We were almost at the door when I heard the distant sound of the basement door opening. The match. I whispered. Right. She extinguished it. Not by waving it or blowing it, but by cupping the flame in her hand. Then she tossed the dead match and the matchbook over her shoulder. Girls? Mrs. Talbot called from the top of the stairs. Is your homework done? Homework? Simon and Derek. I checked my watch. 7:58. I scrambled out of the crawl space. 24. I knew Ray was disappointed by what we'd found or hadn't. I felt a weird kind of guilt, like a performer who failed to entertain. But she never doubted I'd seen a ghost or that he'd told me to open that door, and I was grateful for that. I returned the key, washed, then found Mrs. Talbot and told her I was going upstairs for math tutoring with Derek and that Simon would be there. She hesitated but only for a moment, then sent me off. I retrieved my newly arrived math text from my room and went around to the boys' side. The door was open. Simon sprawled on the bed, reading a comic. Derek was hunched over the too small desk, doing homework. The room was a reverse image of ours, set at the back of the house instead of the front. Simon's walls were covered in what looked like pages ripped from a comic book, but when I squinted, I realized they were hand-drawn. Some were black and white, but most were in full color, everything from character sketches to splash panels to full pages, done in a style that wasn't quite manga, wasn't quite comic book. More than once Simon had gotten in trouble for doodling in class. Now I could see what he'd been working on. Derek's walls were bare. Books were stacked on his dresser and magazines lay open on the bed. Shoved to the back corner of his desk was some kind of contraption full of wires and pulleys. A school project, I supposed, but if I had to build anything that complicated next year, I was doomed. I rapped on the door frame. Hey! Simon slapped down the comic as he sat up. I was just going to tell Derek we should go downstairs, make sure the nurses weren't giving you a hassle. They didn't, did they? I shook my head. Derek set his math text on the bedside table, as a prop, then put his binder over it. I'll be in the shower. Start without me. Won't the nurses hear the water running? He shrugged, and shoved back his hair, lank and stringy now, the dull sheen of oil glistening under the lights. Tell them I was already in there. I'll only be a few minutes. He headed for the door, circling as wide around me as he could manage, which made me wonder how badly he needed that shower. I wasn't about to sniff and find out. If he was showering at night, that might be part of his problem. Carrie said she always used to have a bath in the evening, but she'd had to switch to morning showers or her hair would be gross by dinner. I wouldn't dare suggest this to Derek, but as he passed, I couldn't resist an innocent, "Why don't you just shower in the morning?" "I do," he muttered as he left. Simon put away his comic. "Come on in. I don't bite." He lay back in the middle of his bed, springs squeaking, then patted a spot at the edge. "I'd say this is the first time I've had a girl in my bed, if I didn't mind sounding like a total loser." I reached over to put my books on the beside table, hiding my blush. As I opened my text, to look like we were working on it, I knocked the binder off Derek's. I glimpsed the cover and did a double take. College algebra with trigonometry. I flipped through the pages. "If you can understand any of that, you're way ahead of me," Simon said. I thought Derek was in 10th grade. Yeah, but not in algebra. Or geometry. Or chemistry, physics, or biology, though he's only in 12th grade in the sciences. Only 12th? When he said that no one would question us working on math together, he hadn't meant that he needed help. Great. It was bad enough Derek thought I was a flighty blonde, jumping at every noise. Apparently he figured I wasn't too bright, either. I put the binder back on top of Derek's text. "Tori, she didn't give you a hard time or anything, did she?" he asked. "About yesterday?" I shook my head. He exhaled and crossed his arms behind his head. "Good. I don't know what her problem is. I've made it clear that I'm not interested." At first, I tried being nice about it, brushing her off. When she didn't take a hint, I told her I wasn't interested. Now, I'm downright rude to her and she still won't back off. I twisted around to see him better. "I guess that would be hard having someone really like you and you aren't interested back." He laughed. "The only person Tori really likes is Tori. I'm just a stand-in until she can get back to her football captains. Girls like Tori need to have a guy, any guy, and here I'm her only option. Peter was way too young and Derek's not her type. Trust me, if another guy walks in here, she'll forget I exist." "I don't know about that. I think she might really." "Please. Do I look like diva bait to you?" He turned onto his side, head propped on his arm. "Oh, sure, when Derek and I start at a new school, I'll get some attention from the clique girls." Like he raised his voice to a falsetto. "Hey, Simon, I was, like, wondering if you could maybe, help me with my homework after school? 'Cause it's, like, math and, like, you're Chinese, right? I bet you're so good at it. He rolled his eyes. First, my dad's Korean and my mom was Swedish. Second, I totally suck at math. I don't like cuckoo clocks or skiing or fancy chocolate either. I sputtered a laugh. I think that's Swiss. Hey. So what's Swedish? I don't know. Meatballs. Well, I kind of like those. But probably not Swedish ones. So what do you like? In school? History. Don't laugh. And I'm not bad in English. I write mean haiku, which, by the way, is Japanese. I knew that. I glanced up at the drawings on his walls. You must ace art, though. Those are amazing. His eyes lit up, amber glinting in the deep brown. Not sure about amazing, but thanks. Actually, I don't ace art. Last year, I barely passed. Because I kept handing in my comics. I was doing the assignments, just taking the techniques and using them for my stuff. She thought I was being a smart ass. That's not fair. Well, when I kept handing in my stuff even after the first couple of warnings, I probably was being a smart ass. Or just stubborn. Anyway, I'm not that great in school overall, a solid B- student. Derek's the genius. My best class is gym. I'm into cross-country, hurdles, b-ball, soccer. Oh, I played soccer. I stopped. Well, a while ago. A long while ago. Like back when we'd all chase the ball like a swarm of bumblebees. I remember those days. I'll have to give you some brush-up lessons, so we can start a team. The Lyle House Soccer Club. A very small club. No, a very exclusive club. I leaned back on my elbows, reclining on the bed. The last time I'd talked one-on-one like this with a guy was, well, probably back before I stopped thinking of them as other kids and started thinking of them as boys. Speaking of exclusive clubs, I said, I hope you asked me up here planning to answer some questions. My company isn't enough. His brows shot up in mock outrage, ruined by the gleam in his eyes. Okay, you've been patient long enough. What do you want to know? Everything. We grinned at each other. Okay, you're a necromancer and I'm a sorcerer. You speak to the dead and I cast spells. Is that why you're here? You did something. There he paused, a shadow crossing his face. Well, kind of, but not magic. Something happened. With he cut himself short. From Derek's file, I knew why he was here, though I wasn't about to admit it. Anyway, something happened, and then my dad disappeared and it's a very long story, but the short version is that we're stuck here until someone figures out what to do with us. And until Derek was cured, I supposed. That's why Simon didn't have a file or go to therapy. He wasn't here for any problem. When their dad left, the authorities must have brought Derek here, and decided to leave Simon with him. So what else is there? What other kind of, I struggled for a word. Supernaturals. The different types are called races. There aren't very many. The biggies would be necros, sorcerers, witches, which are the girl spellcasters. Similar, but a different race, and not as strong as sorcerers, or so everyone says. What else? But don't ask me about them because I know next to nothing. Derek knows more. Oh, and shamans. They're good healers and they can astral project. Astral. Leave their bodies. Move around like a ghost. Cool for cheating on tests or sneaking into the girls' locker room, for guys who do that kind of thing. You said Derek knows more about evil. Is that what he is? He glanced toward the hall, head turning as if making sure he could still hear the water running. You dragged it out of me, okay? Hey. He turned onto his side, moving close enough to brush my leg. His voice dropped. About Derek. What he is. If he asks, you dragged it out of me. I straightened, annoyance flickering. So Derek doesn't want me to know what he is? The same guy who threw necromancer in my face and demanded I accept it. If he doesn't want, he does. He will. It's just complicated. If you don't ask, he won't tell you. But if you ask. His eyes lifted to mine, pleading with me to make this easy. I sighed. Fine, I'm asking. What's Derek? One of these things. No. There's not really a name for what he is. I guess you could call it the Superman gene, but that's really cheesy. Which is why they don't call it that. Guys like Derek have physical enhancements, you might say. Extra strong, as you saw. Better senses, too. That kind of thing. I glanced at the math text. Smarter. Nah, that's just Derek. Or so my dad says. Your dad's a sorcerer, too, then, I guess. So he knows others, like us. Yeah. Supernaturals have a kind of community. Maybe network is a better word. You know others so you can talk to them, get things you can't get from the regular world, whatever. My dad used to be right into it. These days, not so much. Stuff happened. He went quiet for a moment, plucking at a loose thread on the comforter, then he dropped it and flopped onto his back again. We'll get into all that later. Huge story. Short answer is, yes, Dad used to be into the whole supernatural network. He worked for this research company, supernatural doctors and scientists trying to make things easier for other supernaturals. Dad's a lawyer, but they needed people like that, too. Anyway, that's how we got Derek. Got Derek. Simon made a face. That didn't come out right. Sounds like Dad brought home a stray puppy. But that's kind of how it was. See, Derek's type? It's rare. We're all rare, but he's really, really rare. These people, the ones my dad worked for, they were raising him. He'd been orphaned or abandoned or something when he was just a baby, and they wanted to make sure he didn't end up in some human foster home, which would be bad when he hit, like, 12 and started throwing people across the room. Only, my dad's company wasn't really equipped to raise a kid. Derek doesn't talk much about living there, but I think it was like growing up in a hospital. My dad didn't like that, so they let him bring Derek home. It was weird. Like he'd never been out before. Things like school or a shopping mall or even a highway totally freaked him out. He wasn't used to people, all that noise. He went still, head turning toward the hall. The pipes clanked as the water shut off. Later, he mouthed. He just got out. He can't hear. Oh yes, he can. I remembered what Simon said about Derek's enhanced senses. Now I understood why Derek always seemed to be able to hear things he shouldn't have been able to. I made a mental note to be more careful. I cleared my throat, pitching it to normal. Okay, so we've got sorcerers, witches, necromancers, shamans, and other really rare types, like Derek. That's it, right? I'm not going to run into any werewolves or vampires, am I? He laughed. That'd be cool. Cool, maybe, but I was happy to leave werewolves and vampires to Hollywood. I could believe in magic and ghosts and even spirit travel, but turning into an animal or sucking blood stretched disbelief farther than I cared to. A dozen questions leaped to my lips. Where was their father? What about the people his dad worked for? Why'd he leave them? What about Simon's mother? But Simon said he'd get into that later. To demand their personal story now would be prying. So there are 3 of us? In one place? That has to mean something. Derek thinks it's because some supernatural powers like yours and his can't be explained, so humans chalk them up to mental illness. Some kids in homes could be supernatural. Most aren't. You have to talk to him about that. He explains stuff better. Okay, back to me, then. What do these ghosts want? He shrugged. Help, I guess. With what? Why me? Because you can hear them, Derek said as he walked in, towel drying his hair. Not much sense in talking to someone who can't hear you. Well, I wasn't going to say it. I glared at him, but he had his back to me, neatly folding the towel and hanging it on the desk chair. He continued. How many necromancers do you think are walking around out there? How would I know? Well, if the answer was a whole lot, don't you think you'd have heard of them? Ease up, bro, Simon murmured. We're talking hundreds in the whole country. Derek yanked a comb through his hair. Have you ever met an albino? No. Statistically speaking, you're about 3 times more likely to bump into an albino than a necromancer. So, imagine you're a ghost. If you see a necro, it's like being stranded on a desert island, then spotting a plane overheard. Are you going to try to get their attention? Of course. As for what they want, he turned the desk chair around and straddled it. Who knows? If you were a ghost and you bumped into the one living being who could hear you, I'm sure you'd want something from her. To know what they want, you're going to need to ask them. Easier said than done, I muttered. I told them about the ghost in the basement. There could still be something back there. Something you didn't find. Something important to him. He idly scratched his cheek, winced, and pulled his hand back. Maybe a paper or an object he'd like you to pass on to his family. Or clues to his murder, Simon said. Or buried treasure. Derek fixed him with a look, then shook his head. Moving right along, it's probably something stupid, like a letter he forgot to give to his wife. Meaningless. That didn't sound stupid to me. Or meaningless. Kind of romantic, really. The ghost lingers for years, wanting to pass along that undelivered letter to his wife, now an old woman in a nursing home. Not my kind of movie, but I wouldn't call it stupid. Whatever it is, I said, the point is moot because as long as I'm on these pills, I can't make contact to ask. Derek swiped at a drop of blood on his cheek, where he'd scratched a zit. He scowled with annoyance, letting it bubble over into his voice as he snapped, "Then you need to stop taking the pills." "Love to. If I could. But after what happened last night, they're giving me urine tests now." "Ugh. That's harsh." Simon went quiet, then snapped his fingers. "Hey, I've got an idea. It's kinda gross, but what if you take the pills, crush them and mix them with your, urine?" Derek stared at him. "What? You did pass chem last year, didn't you?" Simon flipped him the finger. "Okay, genius, what's your idea?" "I'll think about it. We should get her off those meds. I don't really care what that ghost wants, but he could be useful. As long as we have a willing subject, Chloe should take advantage of it, so she can learn. It's not like she's going anywhere soon, unless they ship her off." Simon shot him a look. "Not funny, brother." Derek raked his fingers through his wet hair. "Not trying to be funny. Seeing ghosts isn't easy to hide. It's not like casting spells. After this morning, with Dr. Davidoff and Gil, I caught some of their conversation later." Derek glanced at me. "I was walking by and heard." "She knows about your hearing, brother." Derek scowled at Simon, who only shrugged and said, "She figured it out. She's not stupid. Anyway, you overheard." He stopped, head lifting. "Someone's coming." Voice? "Chloe." Mrs. Talbot called from the stairs. "Snack time. Come on down." Simon called back that we were coming. "Just a sec," I said. "You heard the doctors talking." "What about?" "You. And whether Lyle House is the right place for you." 25. Was Derek trying to scare me? A few days ago I would have said yes, without hesitation. But now I knew it was only honesty. He'd heard it, so he passed it on, with no attempt to soften the blow because the thought wouldn't cross his mind. But it did make me all the more determined to get at least one question answered when the nurse popped her head in to announce lights out. "Mrs. Talbot." "Yes, dear," she said, peeking back in. "Can we call Liz yet? I'd really like to talk to her. To explain about that last night." "There's nothing to explain, dear. Liz is the one who feels horrible about it, frightening you like that. I'm sure you can call her on the weekend." "This weekend?" She slipped into the room, shutting the door behind her. "The other doctors tell me Liz is having some difficulty adjusting." Ray popped up from bed. "What's wrong?" "It's called post-traumatic stress. That last night here was very difficult for her. The doctors in her new hospital don't want her reminded of it." "What if I don't mention it?" "Even talking to you will be a reminder, dear." By Sunday, they say she should be fine. Next week at the latest. Fingers of dread plucked at me. Not now, dear. Maybe next weekend. Maybe next week. Maybe never. I glanced at Ray, but pictured Liz instead, perched on the edge of the bed, wriggling her toes, purple and orange giraffes dancing. Dead Liz. Ghost Liz. That was ridiculous, of course. Even if I could dream up a reason why Lyle House would want to kill kids, what about their families? These weren't street kids and runaways. They had parents who would notice if they vanished. Notice and care. Are you so sure? What about Ray's parents? So attentive, always calling and coming by to see her? And Simon and Derek's dad? The invisible man? I rolled onto my side and wrapped my pillow around my ears, as if that could stifle the voice. Then I remembered what Simon had said earlier. Astral projecting. There was a race of supernaturals who could leave their bodies and teleport. Could necromancers see those teleporting spirits, too? I bet they could. That spirit would be the part that left the body at death or during this astral projecting. So that's what Liz was. What did he call it? Shaman. She was astral projecting here and I was seeing her. That could explain why I could see and hear her, but not the ghosts. It might also explain the poltergeist. Liz was doing that projecting stuff without realizing it, and throwing things around. That had to be the answer. It had to be. Here, Derek whispered, pressing an empty mason jar into my hand. He'd pulled me aside after class and we were now standing at the base of the boys' staircase. Take this up to your room and hide it. It's a jar. He grunted, exasperated that I was so dense I failed to see the critical importance of hiding an empty mason jar in my room. It's for your urine. My what? He rolled his eyes, a growl-like sound sliding through his teeth as he leaned down, closer to my ear. Urine. Pee. Whatever. For the testing. I lifted the jar to eye level. I think they'll give me something smaller. This time he definitely growled. A quick glance around. Then he reached for my arm before stopping short and waving me onto the steps. He took them two at a time and was on the landing in a flash, then glowered back at me, as if I was dawdling. You took your meds today, right? He whispered. I nodded. Then use this jar to save it. Save your urine. If you give them some of today's tomorrow, it'll seem like you're still taking your meds. You want me to dole it out? Into specimen jars. Got a better idea? No, but, I lifted the jar and stared into it. Oh, for God's sake. Save you. Don't save you. It's all the same to me. Simon peeked around the corner, brows lifted. I was going to ask what you guys were doing, but hearing that, I think I'll pass. Derek shooed me down the stairs. I tucked the jar into my knapsack. I'd really rather not use it, but if I squirmed at the thought of stockpiling urine, it would only prove I was the flighty girly girl he expected. 26. I did use the jar, as gross as it was. I'd already provided my sample for that day, so the next time I had to go, I did it in the upstairs bathroom, in the jar, hiding it behind the cleaning stuff under the sink. Cleaning the bathroom was one of our chores, so I hoped that meant the nurses never went under there. We didn't do much work in class that day. We tried, but Ms. Wang wasn't cooperating. It was Friday and she saw the weekend looming, so she just set us up with our assignments, then played solitaire on her laptop. Ray spent most of the morning in therapy, first with Dr. Gill, then in a special session with Dr. Davidoff, while Tori went for hers with Dr. Gill. That meant when Ms. Wang let us out early for lunch, I was left to pass the time with Simon and Derek, which was just fine by me. There was still so much I wanted to know. Asking wasn't nearly so easy, especially since it wasn't stuff we could discuss in the media room. Going outside would have been the obvious choice, but Miss Van Dop was working in the garden. So Simon offered to help me finish the laundry. Derek said he'd sneak down later. So this is where our resident ghost lurks, Simon said, circling the laundry room. I think so, but... He held up a hand, then lowered himself to the floor and started sorting the last basket. You don't need to tell me there might not be a ghost here, and I'm not going to make you try to contact it. When Derek comes down, he might. Don't let him push you around. I don't push her anywhere. Derek's voice preceded him around the corner. If I tell someone to do something and they do it, Derek said, rounding the corner. That's not my problem. All she has to do is say no. Her tongue works, doesn't it? Great. The guy can manage to make me feel stupid even when he's telling me I don't have to let him make me feel stupid. So if they decide to transfer you, what are you going to do about it? Simon balled up a shirt. For God's sake, Derek, they're not. They're thinking about it. She needs a plan. Does she? Simon pitched the shirt into the colored pile. What about you, bro? If word comes down that you're next to go, do you have a plan? They exchanged a look. I couldn't see Simon's face, but Derek's jaw set. I stood and gathered a load for the washer. If they do, I don't see that I have a lot of options. I can't exactly refuse. So you'll just give in? Go along like a good girl. Ease up, brother. Derek ignored him, scooped up the laundry I'd missed, and dropped it into the washer, moving beside me as he did. They won't let you talk to Liz, will they? Huh, what? Tori asked this morning. I heard. Talbot told her no and said she'd told you the same thing when you asked last night. He grabbed the soap box from my hands, lifted the measuring cup from the shelf, and waggled it. This helps. They said I can call Liz on the weekend. Still, seems a little odd. You barely knew the girl, and you're the first one wanting to call her. It's called being considerate. Maybe you've heard of it. He batted my hand from the dials. Darks, cold. Or you'll end up with the dye bleeding. A glance back at me. See? I'm considerate. Sure, when it's mostly your stuff in there. Behind us, Simon snorted a laugh. As for Liz, I continued, I just wanted to be sure she was okay. Why wouldn't she be? He'd scoff at my stupidity, thinking Liz was dead, murdered. Oddly enough, that's exactly what I wanted. Reassurance that my head was stuffed too full of movie plots. I got as far as the part about waking to see Liz on the bed, chattering away. So, Derek cut in. Liz returned from the great beyond to show you her really cool socks. I told them about her dream and her attic appearance. When I finished, Simon sat there, staring, a shirt dangling from his hands. That sure sounds like a ghost. Just because she's a ghost doesn't mean she was murdered, Derek said. She could have had a completely unrelated accident on the way to the hospital. If that happened, they wouldn't want to tell us right away. Or maybe she's not dead at all, I said. Could she be astral projecting? Shamans do that, right? It might also explain how she was moving stuff around. It wasn't a poltergeist spirit, it was her spirit, or however it works. You said our powers kick in around puberty, right? If we don't know what we are when that happens, this is just the kind of place we'd end up. A home for teens with weird problems. He shrugged. But he didn't argue. Would being a shaman explain what she was doing? Throwing stuff around? Could she have been popping out of her body without knowing it? I don't know. The admission came slowly, reluctantly. Let me think about it. We were halfway through dessert when Mrs. Talbot reappeared. I know you kids have free time after lunch, and I hate to interfere with that, but I'm going to have to ask you to spend it in this end of the house, and give Victoria and her mother some privacy. Please stay out of the classroom until it's time for classes, and don't play in the media room. You can go outside or in the living room. Now, last week, if anyone told me to give someone privacy, I'd make sure I stayed away. That was only polite. After a few days at Lyle House, though, when someone said don't go there, I didn't say okay, but why, and decided to find out. In this house, knowledge was power, and I was a quick learner. The question was, how to get close enough to Dr. Gill's office to overhear Tori and her mom, and learn why we had to give them privacy for a friendly mother-daughter chat. I could ask the guy with the supercharged hearing, but didn't want to owe Derek any favors. Mrs. Talbot said the girls were allowed upstairs, but not the boys, because getting to their rooms meant passing Dr. Gill's office. That gave me an idea. I went upstairs, crept into Mrs. Talbot's room, through the adjoining door into Miss Van Dop's, then down the boys' hall to the stairs. My daring move was rewarded the moment I crouched on the stairs. I cannot believe you did this to me, Tori. Do you have any idea how much you've embarrassed me? You overheard what the nurses said about Chloe Saunders when I was here Sunday, and you couldn't wait to tell the other kids. It took me a moment to realize what Tori's mom was talking about. So much had happened this week. Then it hit Tori telling the others I thought I saw ghosts. Ray had said Tori's mom had some business connection with Lyle House, so when she'd dropped off that new shirt for Tori on Sunday, the nurses must have mentioned the new girl and her hallucinations. Tori had been eavesdropping. If that wasn't enough, they tell me you've been sulking over that girl's transfer. Liz, Tori whispered. Her name is Liz. I know her name. What I don't know is why it would send you off the deep end. Deep end? Sulking in your room. Bickering with Rachel. Gloating over that new girl's setback yesterday. Is your medication not working right, Victoria? I told you, if that new prescription doesn't help, you're to let me know. It is helping, Mom. Tori's voice was thick, muffled, like she'd been crying. Are you still taking them? I always take them. You know that. All I know is that if you're taking them, you should be getting better, and this week proves you aren't. But that doesn't have anything to do with my problem. It's the new girl. She's driving me nuts. Little Miss Goody Two Shoes. Always trying to show me up. Always trying to prove she's better. She switched to a bitter falsetto. Oh, Chloe's such a good girl. Oh, Chloe's going to be out of here in no time. Oh, Chloe's trying so hard. She switched back to her normal voice. I'm trying hard. Way harder than her. But Dr. Davidoff already came to visit her. Marcel only wants to motivate you kids. I am motivated. Do you think I like being stuck here with these losers and freaks? But I don't just want to get out, I want to get better. Chloe doesn't care about that. She lied, telling everyone she doesn't think she sees ghosts. Chloe Saunders is a two-faced little bie. She swallowed the rest of word and said, which? I'd never been called anything like that, probably not even behind my back. But I had lied. I'd said one thing while believing another. That was the definition of two-faced, wasn't it? I understand you don't care for this girl. I hate her. She moves in, gets my best friend here kicked out, shows me up with the nurses and doctors, steals my guy. She stopped short, then mumbled. Anyway, she deserved it. What's this about a boy? Her mother's words came sharp, brittle. Nothing. Are you involved with one of the boys here, Tori? No, Mom, I'm not involved with anyone. Don't take that tone with me. And blow your nose. I can barely understand you through all that blubbering. A pause. I'm only going to ask you one more time. What's this about a boy? Tori inhaled loudly enough for me to hear. I like one of the guys here, and Chloe knows that, so she's been chasing him to show me up. Chasing him? Which boy is it? Her mother's voice was so low I had to strain to hear it. Oh, Mom, it doesn't matter. It's just. Don't you Mom me? I think I have the right to be concerned. Her voice dropped another notch. Don't tell me it's Simon, Tori. Don't you dare tell me it's Simon. I warned you to stay away from that boy. Why? He's fine. He doesn't even take meds. I like him and Mom. What are you doing? Getting your attention. I told you to stay away from him and I expect to be obeyed. You already have a boyfriend. More than one if I recall. Perfectly nice boys who are waiting for you to get out of here. Yeah, like that's going to happen anytime soon. It will happen when you decide to make it happen. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it is for a member of the board to have her own daughter sent to this place? Well, let me tell you, Miss Victoria, it's nothing compared to the humiliation of having her still here almost 2 months later. You've already told me that. And told me. And told me. Not often enough or you'd be doing something about it. Like trying to get better. I am trying. Tori's voice rose in a wail of frustration. It's your father's fault he spoils you rotten. You've never fought for anything in your life. Never known what it was to want anything. Mom, I'm trying. You don't know what trying is. The venom in her mother's voice made my skin creep. "You're spoiled and lazy and selfish, and you don't care how much you're hurting me, making me look like a lousy mother, damaging my professional reputation." Tori's only answer was a gut-wrenching sob. I hugged my knees, rubbing my arms. "You don't worry about Chloe Saunders." Her mother's voice lowered to a hiss. "She's not getting out nearly as fast she thinks she is. You worry about Victoria Enright and about me. Make me proud, Tori. That's all I ask." "I'm try," she stopped. "I will. Ignore Chloe Saunders and ignore Simon B. They aren't worth your attention." "But Simon. Did you hear me? I don't want you near that boy. He's trouble, him and his brother. If I hear of you two ever being seen together, alone, he's gone. I'll have him transferred." Life experience. I can talk it up, vow to broaden my horizons, but I'm still limited to the experiences within my life. How can a person understand an experience that lies completely outside her own? She can see it, feel it, imagine what it would be like to live it, but it's no different from seeing it on a movie screen and saying, "Thank God that's not me." After listening to Tori's mother, I vowed never to badmouth Aunt Lauren again. I was lucky to have a parent whose biggest fault was that she cared about me too much. Even when she was disappointed in me, she'd come to my defense. To accuse me of embarrassing her would never enter my aunt's mind. Calling me lazy for not trying hard enough? Threatening to send away a boy I liked? I shivered. Tori was trying to get better. Ray had called her the Queen of Meds. Now I could see why. I could only imagine what life was like for Tori, and even my imagination wasn't good enough to stretch that far. How could a parent blame her child for not overcoming a mental illness? It wasn't like pushing a reluctant student to get a passing grade. It was like blaming one with a learning disorder for not getting A's. Whatever Tori's condition was, it was like schizophrenia, not her fault and not entirely within her control. Tori skipped class that afternoon, not surprisingly. The rule about not hiding out in your room apparently didn't apply to her, maybe because of her condition or maybe because of her mother's position. Between periods, I slipped upstairs to find her. She was in her bedroom, her sobs barely muffled by the closed door. I stood in the hall, listening to her cry, yearning to do something. In a movie, I'd go in there, comfort her, and maybe even become her friend. I'd seen it on the screen a dozen times. But again, that wasn't the same as experiencing it in real life, something I couldn't really appreciate until I was there, outside the door. Tori hated me. The thought made my stomach hurt. I'd never been hated before. I was the kind of kid that, if someone asked others what they thought of me, they'd say, "Chloe? She's okay, I guess." They didn't love me, didn't hate me, just didn't think much about me either way. Whether I'd earned Tori's hate was another matter, but I couldn't argue with her experience of events. To her, I had barged in and taken her place. I'd become the good patient she desperately needed to be. If I walked into her room now, she wouldn't see a sympathetic face. She'd see a victor come to gloat, and she'd hate me all the more. So I left her there, crying in her room, alone. When afternoon break ended, Mrs. Talbot announced classes were over for the day. We were going to make a rare trip into the outside world. We weren't going far, just to an indoor community pool a block away, within walking distance. A great idea. If only I had a bathing suit. Mrs. Talbot offered to call Aunt Lauren, but I wasn't about to interrupt my aunt for that, especially after she'd been dragged away for my misbehavior yesterday. I wasn't the only one being left behind, though. Derek had to go to his session with Dr. Gill. That didn't seem fair, but when I said so to Simon, he said Derek wasn't allowed on the outings. I guess that made sense, considering what he was in here for. The day I arrived, when they'd taken the others to lunch while I settled in, he must have been confined to his room. After everyone left, I took advantage of the nurses being gone and hung out in my room, listening to music. I'd been up there only a few minutes when I thought I heard a rap at my door. I pulled out one earbud. Another rap. I was pretty sure ghosts couldn't knock, so I called a greeting. The door swung open. There stood Tori, looking very un-Tori-like. Her dark hair stood in spikes, as if she'd been running her hands through it. Her shirt was wrinkled, the back untucked from her jeans. I sat up. I thought you went swimming. I have cramps. That okay with you? Her words were clipped, with an undertone of her usual snottiness, but forced. Anyway, I didn't come to borrow your eyeliner. Not like you have any. I just came to say you can have Simon. I've decided. Her gaze slid away. I'm not interested. He's not my type anyway. Too young. A twist of her lips. Immature. Anyway. Take him. He's all yours. I'd have been tempted to shoot back thanks if it wasn't obvious how much this was hurting her. Simon was wrong. Tori did really like him. Anyway, she cleared her throat. I've come to declare a truce. Truce. With an impatient wave, she stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. This silly feud of ours. You aren't worth my. She trailed off, shoulders slumping. No more fighting. You want Simon? Take him. You think you see ghosts? That's your problem. All I want is for you to tell Dr. Gill that I apologized for telling everyone you saw ghosts the first day. They were going to let me out Monday, but now they aren't. And it's your fault. I didn't riff. I'm not done. A touch of her old attitude gave the words a snarky lilt. You'll tell Dr. Gill that I apologized and maybe you blew the whole thing out of proportion. I thought it was cool you saw ghosts and you took it the wrong way, but that I've been nice to you ever since. About giving me Simon. I'm not. That's part 1 of the deal. Part 2? I'll show you something you want to see. What's that? In that a flip of her hand, filthy crawl space. I was going downstairs to see when you were finally going to get my jeans washed, and I heard you and Ray looking for something. I wiped any expression from my face. I don't know what. Oh, stuff it. Let me guess. Brady told Ray there was something in there, didn't he? I had no idea what she meant but nodded. It's a jewelry box full of old stuff. Her lips curled in distaste. Brady showed me. He thought I might actually be interested in it. It's like antiques, he said. Gross. She shivered. When I wasn't all oh, wow, that's so sweet and romantic. I just love rotting necklaces and filthy crawl spaces. He must have mentioned it to Ray. If you want, I can show you. Sure, I guess. Maybe tonight. You think I'm going to risk getting into more trouble? I'll show you now, when I'll have time to shower after. And don't think you'll find it on your own, because you won't. I hesitated. Her mouth tightened. Fine. You don't want to help me? That's just peachy. She headed for the door. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. Hold up. I'm coming. The rest of the audiobook will be continued in the next episode. Join us on Patreon for early access or more great audiobooks. A link is provided in the video description.